The book that I read this week was Gone Girl by Gillian Flynn. There wasn't a title page on the Kindle version, and you can't really read that, I know, but it's on there, and I read it on there this week. I really enjoyed this book. It's a book about a man whose wife disappears on their 5th wedding anniversary, and the events that follow that. I don't want to give away too much of the plot because it's very rich. There are some very well done twists in it, and I'm not going to give away any of that. Although I will say that I'll do this review in 2 parts. I'll start, for those of you who haven't read the book, talking about how I felt, and then we'll have a little break, and I will talk to those of you who have. Those of you who have, that will make sense to you why I would do that. Although, again, I'm not going to give spoilers if I can possibly avoid it. I have this unfortunate tendency when I really enjoy a thing to gush, and I sincerely hope that I am not speaking unduly when I say this, but I sort of came away with the feeling from the popularity of the book and how well it encapsulates so much of our time that this could very well end up being one of those of our time books like Gatsby or On the Road, that it's may end up being on that level, sort of a time capsule to future generations on what we were about. And one of the things that I felt personally vindicated about as a middle-ish age adult, and in fact, I'm roughly of the same age group as the 2 mains in this story. In fact, at one point, Nick types in his birth date, and I was a little surprised to find that his birth date was within 4 months of my own. So we are pretty much in the same age group. I felt a little bit vindicated in that the recession plays a fairly major role in some of the plot points in this story, having suffered through that myself. The housing crisis comes up in it, the businesses closing, the shifts in industries in our country, the rise of the indigent culture, and indeed the widening economic gap between classes in our country are all things that appear in this country. It is also, in this book, rather, it's also a little bit of a book about marriage in our time, I think, in a way. It sort of shows us what it's like for people who have the mentality of contemporary America, the values of contemporary America in some very specific ways. And when they are together, you see, in a marriage, you can, if you so choose, ratchet up self-interest, justice within the marriage as tensely and as high as you choose to. And I think there's an element to which this book is about that. Nick, I felt, was a character who is sort of the spirit of this age, and I really did not like Nick. And from the beginning, I should say, he's very proud of his precious sense of hipster humor. He is so narcissistic and seeking approval and blind to his personal flaws. Of course, there are reasons for all of these things, as there are reasons for just about anyone's personal flaws. I felt that, in a way, Amy is also the spirit of our age. I'll come back to that thought in a moment here. The characters in this book really live. They really are fully formed, even down to the most tangential characters. They're the people that we meet on a daily basis, and I found it to be a wonderful read. And, of course, the plot is quite compelling, quite well done, with some very good twists in it. So I will pause here, and those of you who have not read the book may, at this point, choose to stop. And thank you for watching. I encourage you to read this book. Ta-ta. For those of you who are still with me, what a classic revenge story. What a delightfully classic revenge story in the tradition of the Eumenides, I thought, with a different sin, but that level of judgment raining down on one and the satisfaction of that. I felt that I identified with Amy. I think that all of us, if we're being honest, adjust who we are to circumstance, to fit in, and especially when we might think that if we behave in certain ways, we will be treated better. And I think all of us, if we're being honest, at least have the experience of not having naturally occur within us the emotional reaction that we are told we ought to feel to a certain circumstance. And this often occurs in heightened emotional circumstances as well. I mentioned earlier Amy as the spirit of our age as a possibility, and I think that there is that to it, but there's also very much, I find, in our time and place in history, a strong personal desire to see personal justice. I think so much of the spirit of the internet is this when people actually, I will also say that one of the things that I really appreciated in this book was the treatment of cable news outlets and how hard good journalism is in our country in this time on the same stage as absolute circus journalism and treated on equal footing. These pundits who have made a career off of peddling outrage and inflaming the sense of injustice and based on the court of public opinion and reading into circumstances and directing emotions based on scant, if any, evidence. What a time we live in. And how about that happy ending, huh? I found myself in the last 50 pages smiling over the way that it was playing out, the conclusion it was coming to, how well done I thought it was, and I feel as if the characters will be better people for what they've experienced after a fashion, but maybe not the traditional or wise pathways to virtue, and certainly an unconventional one. One of the things I also appreciate about this book is how much of a mirror it holds up to us, which I alluded to in the part when I was talking about Amy. I feel that that is also true about Nick, and I shudder to think of the times in my life where the things he says and does and feels have resonated with certain mindsets I've been in certain times. And I feel that some of the value of reading a thing that disturbs you in those ways is that sort of self-evaluation, to take care that you aren't falling into the same grooves as the person on the page that you're having objections to. I really enjoyed the book. Thank you for watching. Ta-ta.